Good evening, good evening. Back again. Pelicans Daily presented by Fan Arch. I'm your host, Dylan Bruton. Thank y'all once more for all the love that y'all been showing me in these first two episodes that I've done. Let's get right to it. Let's talk Pelicans hoop. So, Sports Illustrated just released an article today discussing a potential, and they put it through one of those trade generators that you see online, a potential trade for us to get Kevin Durant. Now, I'm not gonna lie, all the the first video I talked about Giannis. Second video I talked about Trey Young. Kevin Durant though, how we feeling on that, right? I know some people are gonna say, well, we had baby KD and BI, and it didn't, it didn't pan out necessarily the way we expected and wanted, but KD, easy money sniper, top five scorer, arguably a top 15 to 20 player, and arguably still a top 10 player now. I mean, last year averaged 27, 6 and 4, 53% from the field. Man's a two-time champ, one-time MVP, 15-time All-Star, NBA 75. I mean, when it's all said and done, gonna be one of the greatest players. No debate. Now, the Suns are a team that right now they are in total limbo. Right, they're not good enough to be a competitive team, but they're not bad enough to tank. That is always the worst place to be in, mediocrity, because at least when you stink, it's like, all right, there's always a way up. When you're great, it's like, hey, we got to keep it up. We got to keep going. But when you're in that like mid-tier lane, you don't know. You don't know where you're gonna go. You don't know if you're gonna improve or if you're gonna regress. Now, reading through this article, a lot would be given up in this trade. So this is the only reason why I think there might be a little bit of hesitance, and especially like just knowing how Joe Dumars is and how he ran the Pistons, it would be very uncharacteristic of him to give up this much. But I'm gonna read out what the projected trade was. So the Suns would obviously get the number 7 overall pick because right now, they don't have many pieces for the future. Obviously, I know they want to keep D Book. They drafted him, developed him. He took him to the finals in 2021. Multi All-Star, represented the U.S. in the Olympics this past summer. And though he's approaching his 30s, again, they still want to keep him as part of their core piece. But they still got that Bradley Beal contract, and teams are not lining up to pick that up. You know what I'm saying? That's not the slight Bradley Beal. I think Bradley Beal could still be a good six man off the bench. You know what I'm saying? But it's just his play at this day and age is not contributing to winning basketball. And yeah, outside of Ryan Dunn, the Suns don't really have many young players that they could potentially build with. So they would definitely want that 7th overall pick so they could get somebody who is part of their core future. We'd also have to give up CJ McCollum, which, given DeJounte's injury, I know some people might be, again, a little conflicted or a little bit, on the fence about that because we don't have we've got Alvarado, but after that we don't have many other point guards. And obviously CJ can play both the 2 and the 1, and with his shot creation ability, it's valuable to have that at the 1. But we'd have to give him up. But I don't think, as I said I believe it was the first video, that I don't believe he's going to be a member. He's going to be a member of the core, given his age. He's already in his 30s, but he definitely still has plenty of basketball years in him to be a contributor on a team that is trying to go somewhere. And Phoenix with this trade comes out pretty nice, but then we get KD. So let me keep going though. Kelly Olynyk, who was actually a pretty solid midseason acquisition. provided some floor spacing as a 3-point shooting big. I mean, he's been doing that since he got drafted in 2013. It would, and he's got a good he's been a good locker room presence from everything that I've witnessed and heard. But you know, there's not much to be said other than, hey, we appreciate you, but we need more, right? Now this player, this one kind of hurt me a little bit because I'm like, I really love his game. I'm still very high on him, but Jordan Hawkins. Now, it would kill me to give up Jordan Hawkins, and a player that Jordan Hawkins reminds me of a bit is D Book. Like, there are some aspects of their game, the just that pure scorer, but more of a jump shooter than a take it to the rim guy. But don't sleep. Don't play too close. And again, I still am very high on Jordan Hawkins. I think his ceiling is incredibly high. Again, he was compared to guys like Rip Hamilton and Ray Allen, his fellow UConn Husky alum. I would be most sad to give up Jordan Hawkins. I'm not gonna lie. I know he regressed this past year in the sophomore campaign, but I still think there's plenty of time for him to get right. And I feel like Joe Dumars would be a great basketball mind for him to learn from. One of the greatest shooting guards of his day. Very smooth game, a game that was able to last for a long time. So I think that's a great person for him to learn under as well, just given that they both played the same position. But if he has to go, then I think Phoenix would utilize his skill set well, and then they've got someone to develop once D Book is Although again, with D Book's game, right, with it not being predicated on athleticism, that type of game ages better than when you are so predicated on athleticism. So, but yeah, that one I ain't gonna lie. When I was reading it, I was like, "Ooh, that one hurt. That one hurt just a bit. Like, oh, not you, not Jordan. But we'll see. We'll see what happens, and maybe I think it all kind of depends on what the Pelicans brass feels like Jordan Hawkins' future and ceiling is. And then finally, a 2029 first-round pick. And given that Phoenix has very little first-round picks available because they traded so much to get Kevin Durant 2 seasons ago and to get Bradley Beal, they're going to need all the picks that they can get. So, y'all let me know what y'all think. I mean, KD, he's been on 4 teams. This will be his 5th team. I know he wants to retire with a ring. It's not happening anytime soon if he comes over to the Bayou. All love, but it's just not. But, we actually really don't know. You know what I'm saying? With KD, right, he's also someone who came back from an Achilles. Someone like him being in DeJounte's corner as he's going through his recovery process, that I think that would be very helpful. I think that the inside and outside duo with him and Kevin Durant, with him and Zion Williamson, Kevin Durant. I'm talking about KD right now. With him and Zion, it could, the vision that they had for him and I think you can't outshine the original, right? You know what I'm saying? B.I. was compared to KD. Why not go for KD? And granted, KD is 36, but he's still playing at a very high level. And I feel like, that's another person that Zion can learn from, just given his experience. KD brings a pedigree, winning 2 finals. And yes, I know people are going to say, well, he was on the Warriors. They were the best team. But, KD won finals MVP both times for a reason. He put up incredible numbers. He was going bucket for bucket with Bron. I mean, let us not forget, okay? So, yeah, y'all let me know what y'all think. I found that to be interesting. Again, I think the Giannis one is more so what I could see the Pelicans really explore. And given that if they would have to give all this up for KD's had multiple, debilitating season-ending knee injuries and his age. And would love the KD, but he's moved around a lot of teams, so that's a lot to bank on. That's a lot to take a risk on. So, but I just found that to be interesting, and I do feel like it could work. I think someone like Trey Murphy would greatly benefit from learning from Kevin Durant. You know what I'm saying? I just think a lot of these guys could learn from him. You know, he's for whatever people think about him, he is an incredibly sharp basketball mind. And it always helps to have sharp basketball minds when you are a young team that is building their way up. So, food for thought. Y'all let me know. Now, this next one, I got a shout out to, and I do apologize if I get your name wrong, but Matt, actually, let me pull up on my phone because sometimes my handwriting is not always the best. But I really like this comment. I was like, this is a comment that stood out to me, and this was from a user. I don't know if he's a subscriber. Hope he is. But where's his name? This is by Mark Simone X. It looks like a French last name. My last name is French too. It's pronounced Bruton. Little sidebar about myself. But he said, if you are serious, you have to mention Derek Queen. Well, Mark, and I do apologize if I butchered your last name, Simona, I do apologize. But if you're watching this, Mark, I'm dead serious, my man. I'm dead serious. So, Derek Queen, I'm glad you brought him up because he was one of my favorite players to watch this past NCAA tournament. The 3 games that Maryland played, he was averaging, 19 a game, up this regular season stats from averaging nearly 17 a game, 9 boards, 2 assists, nearly 53% from the field. And in the Sweet 16 against the eventual national champion, Florida, he put up 27, 5, and 2 steals. Kid can play. He was a highly touted prospect, and he came in and delivered. 6'10", soft touch, has very nice footwork. He's not the most explosive athlete, but he's got the size to bang, and he's got the shooting touch in the low post game. Now, I came across a Reddit forum that said that he's more of a big guard in a big's body. I don't agree with that particular analysis. I don't. I watched Derek Queen, and a good friend of mine by the name of DJ Hamilton, giving you a little plug, my brother. He did a whole article covering and scouting and breaking his game down. And his game, yes, he's got the spacing ability. He can cut. So he has guard instinct. So you can tell that someone like him came up playing guard. He can handle the ball, and that's to me, obviously, in today's NBA, the bigs who can handle the ball are going to be more dynamic than the ones who can't. Now, should we draft him? Mark feels like we should draft him. I'm actually pretty curious, you know what I'm saying? The reason why I'm curious is that I feel like, again, the low post game, the shooting ability, his touch, footwork, these are all things that are very valuable. You know what I'm saying? All very valuable. Now, I mentioned in the first video, I mentioned Colin Murray Boyles, and I apologize for butchering his last name. And there are some similarities with him and Derek Queen as far as like their build and the way they play in the low post, their face-up game. But Derek Queen is bigger, and he's a bit more athletic. But he's not like a jump out the gym athlete. He's not He's not going to be in a dunk. Him and Zion aren't going to go dunk for dunk. You know what I'm saying? That's not his game. That's not who he is. But his NBA comparisons were very interesting, right? So on the low end, compared to guys like Naz Reid and Brad Miller. Now, Naz Reid has also been playing very well for those Timberwolves. And Nas Reed went undrafted. I mean, I remember when Nas Reed was coming out of Jersey, because I do follow a lot of the East Coast prospects, just given my own personal ties to the East Coast. And I was very shocked that he went undrafted. But he's been an amazing player for those Timberwolves. He's a guy that I do believe could be an all-star at some point in his career. His ability to play inside and out, his ability he's developed, as a two-way player, and just having that floor spacing and also having the ability to put the ball on the ground and create. At his size, you can't go wrong with that. And then Brad Miller. Now, some of y'all don't remember Brad Miller. I mean, I don't know how old all the viewership is, so maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong. But I remember when Brad Miller was on the Pacers back in the day, when he was on the Kings, and even when he was on the Bulls. And he was a very great shooter. Again, was someone who could play physical if need be, had a nice post jumper. Wasn't a jump out the gym, above the rim athlete, but that low post game was very valuable. And he was able to, play a long time. He was also undrafted. So, salute to him for carving out the career he did, made multiple All-Stars. And that's just on the low end. That's just the floor. Because you have to always do that when looking at prospects. I like to look at about two comparisons for each. Two people that meet where the floor would be and two people that reach where the ceiling could be. That's how I look at it. You know what I'm saying? I feel like that's the best way to properly gauge a draft prospect. That way you can see a multitude of possibilities. You know what I'm saying? Now, on the high end, some names. So, number one, Zach Randolph. Now, Zach Randolph was a very, very criminally underrated player, in my opinion. You know what I'm saying? Whether it was with the Jailblazers, right, when he first came into the league, the New York Knicks. I'll never forget that infamous video of Stephon Marbury. I think he was at Central Park, and he was like, "We got Zach Randolph," and the fan, real hoop fans was like hype. Some of the casuals was like, "Who?" Because he was coming from Portland. Portland was a smaller market, and they were more infamous than famous at that point because of the Jailblazers stuff. And then he really ended up really becoming a dominant player and a mainstay with the Grizzlies in the 2010s with the grit and grind teams with Marc Gasol and Mike Conley and Tony Allen. And that's a really good comparison for Derek Queen. Now Derek Queen doesn't play with that same kind of meanness that Zach Randolph does. Like Zach Randolph, I'll never forget when he told Boogie, when Zach was on the Kings, at the last part of his career, and he told Boogie Cousins, he said, "In my hood, bullies get bullied." I was like, yo, but this is the same man who was on the sideline with the Nextel flip phone. I said, this brother, I don't want to mess around with him. I don't want to mess around now. You know what I'm saying? He not playing no games. Some of the viewers might know. You see that Nextel pop out. You know what's up. You know what's going on. But Zach Randolph with his game, you know what I'm saying? He could physically overpower people, but he wasn't jumping over anybody. I can't remember too many times that Zach Randolph really flew to the rim. He would get some posters. He caught some bodies in his day, but I never really saw him be you know what I'm saying? But his mid-range game, his face-up game, low post game, and his ability to just get the ball and go to work, I see that very much so with Derek Queen, and he showed that in this past NCAA tournament. He showed that in his freshman campaign. So I think that's a really good comparison for him. And Zach Randolph was an all-star, was a very respected team leader, and was able to carve out a great career for himself. So at pick 7, you can't ask for anything more. Then the final player, now this is another modern player, because I also, if y'all notice sometimes, I like to blend a present and a past player just to show, the evolution and also the multitude and variety in someone's game. Because as much as people like to act like everything is new under the sun, that's not always the case. There's plenty of older players that had transcendent ability that just wasn't properly nurtured, wasn't properly cultivated because of the way the game was in previous eras. But the last name that he was compared to was Alperen Sengun. Now, Alperen Sengun was a huge reason for the Rockets' breakout season this past year. You know what I'm saying? First time All Star. He had been trending in the direction anyway, and he really stepped his game up immensely. Now, the commonality with all four of these guys, because Alperen Sengun, a great passer, by the way, too. Very great passer. I will say that's the one ability that I feel like Derek Queen does have also to his game that Zach necessarily didn't. That wasn't part of his game. Nas can pass because sometimes he's out there on the perimeter. And Brad, I could see Brad would pass him and Mike Bibby and Peja, and Sharif Abdul-Rahim, can't forget him. But Alperen is a really good passer, like damn near Joker-like. Now, I didn't want to throw the Jokic comparison because I saw some people in one of the Reddit subforums, and they were a lot of people from DC. So it was a lot of people who had the ties to Maryland, the DMV, and they were saying that Derek Queen could be like the next Joker. I don't want to put that type of pressure on Derek Queen, nor do I want to sell a dream to anybody in the fan base. We've been through enough. But Alperen is like Joker light. He doesn't have the 3-point shooting ability. But that slow, methodical, but very calculated, low post game and ability to handle the ball. He definitely is able to do that at a very high level. You know what I'm saying? His profile and his pedigree is only going to go up from here. So all those players, like everyone that I named, is like either is or was a valuable player to their respective franchises, and they brought a tremendous amount of value in their play style with the low post ability, with the shooting touch and ability. And I feel like that's their Queen. That's going to be his bread and butter. Now, the only concern, I'm going to get back to it, but the only concern is defense. At his size, his defense does need some work. But that is where Yves Missy, that's where he is the perfect big man to pair with Derek. And if they want to run like a 3 big lineup with putting Zion at the 3, now you get the floor spacing from the 4 that Zion can't give you, which allows Missy and Zion to be at the basket, and then you can put Derek Queen at the basket on the in the mid range, on the block, or you can put him outside on the 3-point line. You know what I'm saying? His 3-point percentage went down. I believe he shot, and I thought I had this written down, so that's on me. But I know he shot, his 3-point shooting went down a little bit during the tournament. But for the season, he ended up making 7 of 35 shots, which it's not the best, but he shot over 76% from the free throw line. And I always look at free throw shooting is a very good indicator of how good someone is as a shooter, because it's literally implied, and it's literally implied free, right? Your form, your repetition, your consistency, and also just mentally, right? Are you locked in this moment? Them points are free. Don't take that for granted. So I feel like there's room for growth and improvement as a floor spacer. So for those that when it came to Kaman Malak, I was reading. Again, I'm doing as much as possible to keep in the loop because I know everyone has different perspectives. But if with the Kaman Malak pick, people are saying, well, we lose floor spacing with that. We gain defense and lose floor spacing. In this situation, you gain floor spacing, you gain low post stability, a very refined game, I will say. But the defense definitely is something that's got to be worked on. And with his weight. And I know that's also another thing that some Pelicans fans are going to be like, more weight problems? Seriously? Seriously? You know what I'm saying? And hey, they got some good crab up in Maryland. Some great seafood up there. So, but I got faith in Derek Queen. He very much plays with a zeal and a passion for the game. It was very evident this past tourney. He made a name for himself, and I think he's going to have a bright career in the NBA. And I would not be opposed if we draft him at 7. Not at all. All right, now more trade talk. Well, so another name that I saw float around, and I've seen him float around in several articles and some other channels. Not to bite, but more so to consider, more so to put it in the air. Kristaps Porzingis. Now, this past playoff, Kristaps Porzingis dealt with post-viral syndrome. Many thought it was COVID, but it turned out they just announced today. Brad Stevens just announced to the public that he was dealing with post-viral syndrome because he played only about 15, at most 20 something minutes in this Eastern Conference semifinals versus the Knicks, and he was just a complete shell of himself out there. You know what I'm saying? He averaged nearly 20 a game and 7 boards and almost 2 blocks on 48% from the field and 41% from 3. Had a very good year. But his stats just completely fell down a cliff. You know what I'm saying? For a game, that's quite a drop. And I know a lot of people as a whole feel like he's a very frustrating player. And maybe I'm just speaking out loud of how I feel. I remember when he came into the NBA in 2015, a lot of Knicks fans were not happy. They were not happy. I know a lot of Knicks fans. They were not happy. They were not happy. But he had an amazing rookie year, and his star potential looked like it was like he was going to be that next face. He was going to be, kind of like the impact that obviously, because neither of them were drafted there, but the impact that Jalen Brunson and Karl Anthony Towns are having right now for those Knicks, people were expecting like that was the kind of player, like Kristaps was going to be the franchise player, and he looked like it at the start. You know what I'm saying? He was an all-star there, first Knick all-star since since Melo, and the first Knick bigs to be an all-star since Amari. So he was following behind some big names, some big shoes, and it just didn't go as planned. And then he went to Dallas. It was expected that he was going to go there, and I know Cuban thought, oh, I'm getting the more athletic and shot blocking Dirk, and it didn't really go out like that. Didn't really go as planned. And then, in my opinion, he turned a leaf when he was in Washington. I felt like, granted, Washington was not competing for anything, but I felt like he played very well in Washington. I would catch some of his highlights and be like, wait, okay, this looks like the Kristaps of the old that I was hyping up, all these years ago when he was in New York. Now, we named some big names: Giannis, Trae Young, KD. They're big names, and they're going to warrant a big trade piece. They're going to warrant a big trade package. Someone like Kristaps Porzingis, I feel like one could be very well in the chopping block, just because the Celtics right now, due to the second apron, and there's a lot of different logistics that are still being fleshed out. But that core that they had for that 2024 run, because look, we're not gonna forget KP balled balled out crazy in game one against those Mavs. And some people say that was a big momentum shifter. And he came off the bench, you know what I'm saying? Because he missed most of the he had missed most of the season, recovering from an injury, but he came back lights out. But people are looking at this Celtics team from 2024 and saying that might be the last. This past year, that was their final run. You know what I'm saying? Just because like they can't afford to keep everybody there. You know, with Tatum's contract, with Jaylen Brown's contract, and with Drew Holiday's contract, with what Derek White is going to be owed, and tough decisions are going to have to be made. And in my perspective, I very well see Kristaps being on the chopping block. You know what I'm saying? We'll see how things go, but it's looking like he's going to be the odd man out. You know, just given how much of a stark decline it was after unfortunately getting sick. But they're going to factor that in of like, we needed more of you out there. You know what I'm saying? Cat was able to be a mismatch nightmare on some occasions in that series. That's where Kristaps Porzingis 2015 draft class, right? Both of them. That's where he's supposed to be the one, contesting and matching him, but it didn't really go like that. So bringing him into the fold, should we trade for him? Should we wait till they cut him, take on his salary? He's not on the same tier as Giannis, as KD, and Trae Young. So that's also where, it's a little bit more feasible. It's a little bit more realistic. And given his play style, I mean, yes, he's a 7'3" big that averages less than, 8 rebounds, which the Jaren Jackson Juniors of the world, and they're great at what they do as far as stretching the floor and being able to play defense. But it's like, my man, you're the tallest one out there. I need some more rebounds. Please. But I do feel like KP could work again with Missy at the center. You bring someone like KP into the fold. The floor spacing, he can run to the rim, catch lobs. He's very athletic still, and his defensive ability. The issue of like, are we giving up defense? Are we giving up shooting? Well, you get defense and shooting. Make no mistake from Kristaps. Make no mistake. And if need be, he can. He can create for himself. He doesn't need someone to, get him just a good look. He can create for himself, face up. So who knows? And now he's got more winning pedigree as being a champion from that 2024 Boston team. It never hurts to add guys in the locker room who made it to the finals. And it certainly doesn't hurt to add guys who won it because they know what it takes to get there. So, that's just a potential thought. There's nothing concrete with that yet. That was just something that I saw floating around and circulating. And I saw some people saying, the likelihood of us being able to get a Giannis, get a KD, get a Trae Young, given that all those guys are going to be looking to be in bigger markets and be on teams that are ready to win right now. But with KP's 29, he's ready to win a ring. And perhaps he could add he could make a positive impact. Playing next to Zion, and then playing next to Missy. Those are, you can run a three. You can, again, we're talking about with Derek Queen, you can run a 3 big lineup with them because each of them is going to make up for a deficiency at some point. So, food for thought. Now, finally, I mentioned him earlier, but DeJounte Murray. Now, it's been a year, and I was reading an article I was reading an article on on one of the Pelicans fan sites, and it was talking about who won the trade. Was the return on investment was it to be had, or was it wasted? And I feel like it's too soon to tell. Now, granted, we gave up a lot. You know what I'm saying? We gave up Dyson Daniels, who just won Most Improved Player, led the league in steals, averaged a ridiculous 3 steals a game, averaged 14, 6, and 4, on 49% from the field, 34% from the three. Free throw shooting still needs work. He's shooting in like the high 50s, low 60s. That's, as a perimeter player, that's, I'm trying to think of like a guy like Bruce Bowen, right? He was doing that, but he was not a primary focal point of the offense. He was there to be a defensive stopper and to be, a physical player that was unafraid to be a junkyard dog out there and get dirty if need be. But it would be nice to have Dyson still in New Orleans. I can't sit and lie. I do feel like there was missed opportunities. He was just bigging up Zion a couple of days ago, saying that he saw Zion eat well and be very dedicated and motivated. So it was nice to see just that there still is that brotherhood there. You know what I'm saying? There still is that high level of respect. Even though they're on opposing franchises now, and I saw someone in the comments said, I don't think any Atlanta fans is watching, but then someone like quickly was like, nah, I'm tapped in, and I think the man said his wife's from New Orleans. That's how he became he got immersed into the New Orleans sports culture. And there's a real, I don't think people get it, but there's a real relationship. There's a real relationship / rivalry. It's very hot and cold with New Orleans and Atlanta with sports. So it is ironic that Dyson, is now in Atlanta, but he's killing it. He's doing really well. Love watching his game. We also gave up Larry Nance Jr., who, was a solid veteran presence. Gave up E.J. Liddell, young guy that didn't really get his footing in. Gave up Cody Zeller. No diss to him. 2013 class. Yeah. Shout out to Kelly Olynyk. But there's a reason why that draft is not rated too highly outside of Giannis, C.J. McCollum, Rudy Gobert, Oladipo. You know what I'm saying? It's a reason why that draft class is not regarded too highly. 2 first-round picks. Now, that one hurt because one of those first-round picks is the 22nd pick in this year's draft. So the Hawks, they're a team that they are in that limbo lane, that mediocre mid lane where it's like, again, they're not good enough. Even though they got the number 1 pick last year, right? They were not able to sustain bad play enough, but they're not good enough to get back to where they were in 2021 when they made that run to the Eastern Conference Finals. So they're in a weird spot. They don't know what Trae Young's future is looking like, and if they do get rid of Trae Young, then that just all signs point to they're going to be building around Jalen Johnson and Zachary Richardson. And DeJounte was brought over there to be the defensive ace, but also another on-ball shot creator next to Trae Young. And it didn't necessarily pan out how they would have wanted. And I brought up last video that if we were to make a trade for Trae Young, Trae and DeJounte are still very close and good friends. So, you have that chemistry right already there. But as regards to DeJounte himself, let's get to Mr. Murray. Now, again, I got a lot of love for DeJounte Murray. One of my favorite players of this 2010s, player who I watched when he was coming out of high school in Seattle. He's only a graduating year ahead of me. So, with those certain guys, like I really came up watching them. You know what I'm saying? I really watched them grow and blossom. And on paper, the stats don't look bad, but when you consider how much we had to give up, 17.5 a game, 6.5 boards, seven assists. But those are his lowest numbers since the 2021 season. And he only shot 39% from the from the field, and he shot just 29.9% from three. So right at like bordering on that. That's like when you had like a 79.9, you tell your teacher like, "Yo, please let me get a B." Like he's right there to being a 30% free throw shoot, 3-point shooter. And they were only 9-2. He only played in 31 games, and they were 9-22 in those 31 games. So he never got comfortable. Hurt his hand early on, and then ended up tearing his Achilles. I feel like it's too soon to tell. It's too soon to tell. If there's a player who I believe just has that chip, that dog mentality, I talked about with Zach Randolph. Like if you know where DeJounte, his upbringing, where he came from, his story, it was a lot of hell and half water that he had to overcome to get to the league. You know what I'm saying? So, that does something to somebody. That does something to somebody's character when, they recognize and know, like, yo, it's not just me I got to be worried about. It's a lot of people that are dependent. There's a lot of people depending on me, and it's a lot of people who are looking up to me and looking at me as a role model and influence. And, just that heart and that grit, right? This is, again, sidebar, but people have talked about, the NBA is getting soft, and these guys, they're all coming from good homes, which I'm like, I'm glad that, I hear the soft part, but we shouldn't be mad that they're coming from good homes. We should be supporting and celebrating that. But DeJounte, what I'm saying, comes from a bit more of a rougher background as far as his upbringing. And he, his energy that he plays with, it's reflective of that. He really came up out the mud. Like, let's just put it as bluntly as possible. And he's carved out a great career for himself because a lot of people weren't really expecting him to become an all-star when he got drafted. Now, I always remember LeBron going out his way to mentor and work with him when he was at Washington. And, when you're being noticed by one of the greatest players of all time, still a face of the league like LeBron, that's no small feat. More than likely, you got to be somebody. So, LeBron saw the vision. He came through to San Antonio. He had to back up Tony Parker early on. Had to learn and kind of earn his stripes. And Coach Popovich. Shout out to him. To me, that's the greatest head coach of all time. Coach Pop is no walk in the park. You know what I'm saying? He comes from a military background. So you get you get two very contrasting energies, but DeJounte developed and blossomed immensely under Coach Pop's tutelage, and that led to him becoming one of the best two-way players in the league, an all-star, and becoming, very briefly the Spurs franchise player post Kawhi and pre Victor Wembanyama. He's not been brought into New Orleans to be, the face. That's Zion's burden to bear. That's Zion's expectation. But we need more, right? We need that production that he had when he was an all-star. We need that production that he had in Atlanta next to Trae Young, because he did put up good numbers. He was, putting up, in the low 20s, around the same when it came to, rebounds and assists. And that caliber of production will and can lead to wins. I do believe so. So right now, articles like that, they have some bit of weight to them more than, I would like to acknowledge. But that just gives an opportunity for DeJounte to come in and show and prove. Now, unfortunately, he's going to be out for most of this season up until somewhere ranging between November and February, which, that's two very different times, what I'm saying, before Christmas and then, slightly before All-Star break. But if there's any player who I believe is going to come back, chip on his shoulder, hungry, ready to prove, and ready to prove to the fan base that, this organization did not make a mistake in trading for me. This organization did not make a mistake in giving up this much to get me. I believe in DeJounte Murray, but he does have to play better. Simple and plain. And I mentioned that's one of my favorite players of, the last decade, a guy whose career I've really watched. But he does have to play better. And what they need in New Orleans from him is to be the defensive leader on the wings and in general. You know what I'm saying? And be a strong veteran presence and bring that energy, bring that guff, bring that grit, bring that dog mentality. Because that's the thing too, that like when you have players who are unafraid of confrontation, let's put it like that, right? Because DeJounte, that's one thing. He's not scared of confrontation at all. So when you have players like those, it's important to make sure that they are properly supported because, you know what I'm saying, they're the first to respond and react when something goes down. And I think that it's always good to have those type of players in the fold. And I also feel like, DeJounte is going to benefit from being around and learning from Coach Joe. I mean, not the coach, sorry, but team president Joe Dumars, right? Joe Dumars had some similarities as a very hard-nosed physical player. Now, granted, he was more of a shooter, slightly more of a finesse player, and he wasn't the athlete that DeJounte is. But as far as like a physical, tough player who played with an edge, who played with a mean streak, and granted, they expressed it very different. Joe was a very polite and more of a quiet guy. DeJounte's a little bit more, you know what I'm saying? You're going to hear from him and you're going to see him. But I feel like that's someone that DeJounte can learn from. I bet, I'm probably sure they're having conversations right now as we speak. Maybe not at this hour, but as we speak, I'm sure they're having conversations. So I feel like, if DeJounte does not produce within the next few years, also given he's got a big contract, a lot of teams are not going to just willy-nilly want to pick up that contract. So that forces us to stay and stick with him. But if he produces, if he turns a corner and is back to being where he was in Atlanta and San Antonio, then, hey, articles like those ain't going to be written. It's going to be like, hey, maybe we overreacted a little too soon. Maybe we jumped the gun. Who knows? But, I feel like this season is going to be very interesting. Everything is going to get a lot more interesting after the draft, especially. All eyes are going to be on this draft in general, but there's going to be a lot of eyes on us, obviously, given Zion's situation. But just looking at like what we end up doing, because we're a team that on paper should be a lot better than where we are. And there are some organizational things that have to improve, but I believe that a new culture and a new day is upon us. And I believe that when you have certain players who, are coming in and they have that competitive energy, it's infectious. So I'm just here's to hoping that we continue to get players who have that mentality, who have that in their mindset, and are going to keep bringing that through in and throughout. But only time will tell. Only time will tell. But it was, as always, a pleasure to chop it up with y'all. Please make sure to like, share, subscribe. Tell a friend, tell the whole fam. I'm Dylan Bruton. This is Pelicans Daily, presented by Fan Arch, and I'm signing out. Y'all stay blessed. Stay tuned for more content.